today in this podcast, would you consider this work? Would you consider this life?
I would say both
It's the ability to believe that anything and everything
is
is
possible.
possible. When you're an entrepreneur, there is no 9 to 5.
Designers are doing that.
Absolutely. When a designer is thinking about creating a product, they also think about communicating the use of that product.
Does VASTU come into the picture?
It's how to ring fence your design. It's important for designers to consider.
We're restricted to this idea of what UX is all about.
It becomes extensive.
Hi, this is Jacques and you're watching In Perspective. Today I have a very special guest who's a well-known design entrepreneur with over 20 years of industry experience. We're going to talk about another perspective of UX in this show today. Stay with me. Ben D'Souza, welcome to In Perspective.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful to have you here. So I wanted to talk about the idea of UX is restricted to, I think, only mobile app and website. Every time I talk to somebody, the first thing that comes in their mind is, are you designing website and mobile? But I think UX is anything and everything. Can we bring the perspective of physical product design?
So at Love That Design, what we do as an organization.
What is Love That Design?
So Love That Design is a digital ecosystem for architecture and interior design in the region. We celebrate all things design. It's in our name, and we're very passionate about it. So a lot of what we do in the region is showcase what good design looks like. And a lot of that is in the form of projects that exist. So these are architectural and interior design projects that are exceptionally photographed and showcased on our platform. The beauty of a space, of course, when you consider interior design, is about the way things are laid out and the way the experience happens, but it's also about the products that are used in it. And I think that's what's the most interesting part of what we do. We showcase product from different manufacturers all over the world. And what's interesting is when you consider product design versus other forms of design, is that it's a lot about the end use
End
of
user.
that end user and the end use of that product. So if you consider something like a chair, anything, let's talk about a chair in a restaurant. It's so important that, and it's often overlooked. Many people think that it's a chair. It's got legs, it's got a seat, it's got a back, and it's going to be something that you can put into a space. But there is something magical about the dimensions of it, about the height of the chair, about how high the seat is in comparison to the table that you're sitting on. And I find that it's so important to have that design thinking surrounding a product or any sort of innovation that's usually missed out on. So I feel product design in itself is an approach, and that's an approach that's so important for us to consider when we're putting this into the space.
I remembered in an interview I was asked this question because you mentioned chair. So I remember now door. Like they said, should you push the door or should you like pull the door? Like which would be the good experience? What would be your answer to
So
that?
if you think about something as simple as a door, I think while it's important to have a push and a pull, I think what's more important really is the signage and the messaging that goes onto the
Yeah.
door. If a door has a signage slapped on it that says push, then you push the door. Or if you say pull, you pull the door. It depends on how you approach the door, to be honest. And I feel,
Depends on user also. Maybe if they're wheelchaired or something,
yeah,
then maybe it would be easier for them to push. I don't know. Yeah, it would be easier for them to push, right?
in today's day and age, honestly speaking, you need these door controls that open these things automatically. In most places, we have them in space. But I really think that it's important for a user to understand, or for a designer rather, to really signpost how the device needs to be used, whether it's a door or a chair or whatever. I think if you consider a chair, going back to the chair example, if you think about something that's a more ergonomic chair,
Right.
it's so important to have the signage on the right handles and the knobs that exist, so that you actually propel the chair up and down. But it has to be almost intuitive for a designer to consider, hey, I need to signpost how this product is going to be utilized. And so it becomes very important for when a designer is thinking about creating a product, they also think about communicating the use of that product within the product itself. So when it comes to a door, it's really dependent on whether or not the
Also
sign is there on the door.
accessibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Accessibility, of course, today's day and age is really important. I mean, it's people of determination and how they need to access a space has to be a prime consideration. Um, and so it is so essential for us to have those considerations put into place when we are designing products as well.
In accessibility, I was researching about that specific in UX, and there are a lot of downsides of it if you don't make it inclusive, if the
Yeah.
design is not inclusive. So you spoke about automatic door, right? Is it a voice command based?
Really depends on the budget.
If it's voice command based, so I saw an advertisement where the guy had a toothache and he went to the dentist. He came back and he was very happy in the beginning because everything is automatic and it looks really luxurious and the, after he came back from the dentist, he couldn't speak. Now he's not able to open the door. Now he's looking at another person who's like doing everything organically. It was like, I wish I had that life. And I was like, if this design would have made for everyone who cannot speak, who cannot do stuffs, disability, I feel like inclusive enough.
It's a very important point that you make, because I think when you consider product design and accessibility, you also always need to think of a backdoor. A funny story, and completely off script, but while driving in over here today, I usually use Android Auto on my car.
In Dubai.
And in Dubai, yes.
Okay.
And so for some reason, it refused to connect today. And I was lost. I was lost for a few minutes, because now I'm sitting in this car and I'm thinking, right, how do I restart the user interface so that I can get my Android Auto on, so I can figure out how to get to the podcast studio. And there was no real back door. So the only thing I could do was stop at the side, switch the car off, switch it on again, and you have to hold the volume button for 30 seconds, which I had to look up and figure out. And so it's just that there was no back door for me to use. Otherwise, the only other thing I could do is have my phone on my hand and put it in my screen and say, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And that's not an interesting way for any driver to drive.
If they would have included this edge cases that it might happen, we could have designed something differently.
Yeah, I
than
think the simplest feature that the car could probably have is a button that says restart iDrive or restart the entertainment system, so that the car would automatically reconnect. And of course, it's a very first world problem to have, but I think as designers today, it's important to think about what happens when the prime usage fails, and then how do you have a fail safe or a backdoor plugged into a design so that the product can continue to be used.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially when you start using a product, you get so much familiarity and so much
Yes,
dependence on it. I think it's important for designers to consider, okay, what if this doesn't work? How do I still use the product in such a way that I can continue to utilize it? Maybe it's in an impaired form, but at least it's still there.
Right.
In the case of the dentist and the door,
yeah.
or the guy who came out from the dentist and needs to use a voice control. If there's no other way to use it, or if because of his impaired speech, the voice control didn't understand the command, then what happens in that case? Maybe there's a button or a sign or something that's a failsafe that allows you to get past that.
Yeah. It's interesting. So many things we have to put it into consideration. If we don't do that, it's actually makes our life so much difficult.
Absolutely.
Also, one interesting thing, like I don't think people understand, is that as UX designers, we are creative and our main goal is to solve a problem. So we might be positioned in a way to become entrepreneurs naturally. It might be easier for us. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so. How can as you are an UX entrepreneur, how can they become one from just a 9 to 5?
I think the first thing people need to realize that when you're an entrepreneur, there is no 9 to 5. And people usually think about work and life, and there has to be a separation between the two.
It doesn't have to be like that.
I think it's important for it. A lot of it is mindset, right? And so if you think about work and life and the two merging together so they become work life,
Yeah.
if those borders are blurred a little bit, it allows it to not become more of a balancing act, but a rather a symphony or a harmony that you need to
But
think
somebody
about.
who's not passionate will always be like, I'm not going to work after 5 p.m. I'm not going to.
It's a luxury, to be honest, to be an entrepreneur, because I feel like not everybody's built for it. And so you have to first think about that mindset. You have to think about, can I afford to be able to not have that blurred line or that boundary between the two, because they they begin to merge. I don't think I take any days off, but then I don't think I approach work like work either. So if I go to the office, it's because I enjoy going to the office and I've made my environment something that I enjoy. I never have a bad day at work because they're all good days because there's no work.
You like doing it.
I do love doing it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so we can become an entrepreneur within the firm while being in 9 to 5 if we are passionate about it and we really don't separate work-life
Yes,
balance.
and I think it's more about harmony than balance. You need to try to figure out how to make both of them work together so that they're symphonic and they sing together. It's a lot of these moving parts. For example, today in this podcast, would you consider this work? Would you consider this life?
I would say both. I like it, so I'm gonna do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it in that form,
Yes.
this does not become about this struggle. Is it work? Is it
Yeah,
life?
yeah, yeah.
It's neither. It's just a thing, and
Yes.
it's just how I
And
function.
people ask me, a lot of people on LinkedIn ask me this one question: how do you even find the passion? Because they're so confused after 12th. Usually in Indian society, they're gonna go for medical or engineering.
Absolutely.
Now it has become slightly better, but it's still there. Like parents would actually ask you to do that.
Yes. I think,
How do you even find the passion?
growing up and going to school, everybody's tested on the same parameters, right? And the sad thing about that happening is that you never really identify what you're strong at. You and I are two completely different people,
Yeah,
and we're
absolutely.
completely, if we probably tested very different in school. And what happens is when we move into the real world, you suddenly realize that each of us have our own strengths and each of us have
Yes.
our own weaknesses. Maybe when we're paired together, we complement each other,
Yeah.
or we're both so strong in one place that we fail to we fail to have somebody who can take care of our weaknesses. I think it's essential for when it comes to finding your passion is to try multiple things until you understand what you feel good about. And to be honest, most people already know what they enjoy doing. It's really about
They
how do I.
don't. They don't.
Do you feel so?
I think so. I think I was fortunate enough to find design in the first place. But a lot of people either just try and test. Somebody came to me. She was working in my firm. And she was an operation executive. She studied computer science. Then she didn't become an engineer. She actually went for a job in operation executive. She worked for 3-4 years. Now she was like, Shanika, I want to learn UX design. Can I get into this profession? I was like, what is this way? Like, why is it like so much
So when I say that
confusion?
people always know or already know what they
Yeah.
enjoy doing, what I mean is that when you experience something, you know whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
Right?
that's for sure.
When I started off myself, I studied computer science, but my first job was data entry. And I
It's
did
okay, similar, but you
I
knew.
was 16 years old and I was doing data entry where I was helping a friend of mine stock take. My second job, I was a teacher, and I found that I enjoyed teaching computer science. So HTML and design and this kind of
CSS.
stuff. Yes, exactly. And so I was teaching people who were much older than me because I was maybe 17 at the time. I don't know. But the next job was in sales. And over time, what happens is because you start experiencing different things, I think the way to find your passion is don't say no. Don't say no to
Yeah.
any experience that
Or
you
maybe
have.
they take too long to make a decision.
Discovery is something that just you have to it lasts over time. I think I enjoy applying what I've learned.
Yeah.
And when you think about your passion in that form, rather than I'm a UX designer, or I am a CEO of an organization, or I am an accountant.
Yeah.
I could be any of these things, but it's more about understanding why you do what you do
Yeah.
and really enjoying that as you go along doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
When you realize that you're not enjoying it anymore for whatever reason, I don't want to run this company anymore, or I don't want to look at this spreadsheet
Yeah.
anymore. When you move past that and you're able to do more of these things, then I think you find your new passion, and then
Yeah.
you work on that, and then
You
you
know, this
grow
I
from
feel
there.
like the struggle that I've heard is that I have invested so many years in this. I have to continue it because otherwise it's a waste.
Yeah.
But you're wasting more time probably if you continue it because you're not liking it anyway.
I had an interesting conversation with my co-founder yesterday, and we were talking about reinventing ourselves. It comes to the end of
Yes,
the
yes, yes,
year,
yeah.
and you're like, okay, 2025, we're going to do these things and that thing, and
As a resolution, reinvent everything.
exactly. And we were just sitting around and joking, but it came to a place where we were talking about, okay, we could be astronauts. They're like, astronauts? Yeah. 10 years from now, if we put our heads to it and we try to work really hard at it,
It's possible.
it's possible. And that's really it, right? The time that you invest in doing something, you use it as an opportunity to
Yes.
learn and a stepping stone to get to the next level
Right.
of whatever you need to do. I know this is probably very far away from UX, but in terms of entrepreneurship, you have to think about using what you've learned to achieve the next step of what you need to do. And if you decide that space travel is something that you're interested in, so be it.
I was hearing a podcast where they were saying it's possible for Elon Musk to do this kind of things because he believes he can.
Absolutely.
And he takes steps towards it. For him, in his mind, I think, yeah, you spoke about mindset. It's possible for him.
Two things that. So, one, of course, it's the ability to believe that anything and everything
It's
is
possible.
possible. The second thing is to be really fickle about your choice. If you've
What does that
decided,
mean?
if you've decided that this is something that I don't want to do anymore, switch.
Yeah.
Switch and fail and move on with your life. There's no
Hold back.
Yeah, there's no shame in failure, because failure is also a lesson.
Yeah.
I personally failed many times over.
I don't think there is any entrepreneur who hasn't failed.
Yes, it's not possible, because that failing is your learning. Everybody is always saying, I have only so much time to do this activity and move on. We had a conversation
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this when we
just
started
now,
as
yeah.
well, right? And I was trying to tell you that you don't really fail. You've
Yeah.
already succeeded,
Yeah.
right? You've already gone past that point, because the only thing that you failed at probably is identifying this audience. The conversation that we're having could probably work for another audience as
Yeah,
well. So
that's true.
it doesn't really figure into that. Another thing that I feel is really important as an entrepreneur is my belief in everything's already been done, all of it, everywhere. It's just,
Now we are so much privileged, right? You don't have to pay for it.
yeah, every solution has already been found, whether that is a solution that nature has found or whether that's somebody else who's invented it already. Today, we are limited probably only, I feel, by language as a barrier. The discussion that we're probably having over
Yeah.
here today has probably been had before in another language or another space. I think that we just don't have the awareness for it because we're not exposed to it for whatever reason.
What do you mean by another space? Like,
Probably somebody talking about, today we're talking about entrepreneurship and in UX, right?
yeah,
What if that same discussion or the same
could have happened in different time and space.
in a different industry, let's say?
Oh, okay.
Maybe people were talking about medicine and biomedical engineering, and they say, okay, what does entrepreneurship and biomedicine
Okay,
look
same
like?
things are getting
And
repeated.
the conversation would be, you need to fail,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need to
yes.
learn, you need to do all
True,
of
true,
these
true.
things. So I think the message is out there. It's already there. And I think what's important is to keep your ears open and keep listening and try to learn more as you go on.
Do you believe in first come advantage? Like, because there are already competitors out there, there are already people.
It's not about
First
so
mover
first mover
yeah.
advantage is essential, but it's essential to find out what your move is, what niche you're moving in, right? If you think about podcasts in general, there are so many that
Yeah,
exist.
exactly.
But if you don't find your niche and you don't find your audience and you don't talk to your audience, similar like product design or UX or any sort, it's about that audience and that niche. How do you ensure that the people who are actually listening to this are going to benefit from it, and making sure that you really cater to that audience or shape your
Or
message
maybe
in
how
such a
do you
form.
do it differently? The reason why I don't believe in it is because Yahoo was already there and then Google came into the picture. Everyone uses Google.
Yes. And now that everybody uses Google and there's the search engine that's there today, everybody's on ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and you ask the question there first.
Yeah.
To the point where now I've got it on my phone, and I'm thinking, hey, you
Mm.
know what? I'm going to have whole conversations
Yes,
with
yes.
this device, this agent that's going to help me. Interestingly enough, I've started creating my own agents, and I train them on different aspects of
love
my
that design.
organization. Yes, on so we've got ChatGPT as the GPTs or the
Right.
GPTs that you have, and you can train your own agents. I give them identities, I talk to them, and I say, hey, for example, create this policy. I've got legal counsel
Okay.
that I fed past information about my organization. There's an HR assistant, and so on and so forth. And as an entrepreneur, you need to find ways to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
I want to know more about Love That Design, because you mentioned so many things. I think somewhere on your LinkedIn I saw something called Dot Design.
Dot Studio.
Dot
So
Studio.
Dot Studio is
What is that?
software that we've created for interior design firms to be able to help them design better. So if you think about design, there's always these creative people who are drawing and creating spaces and doing these kind of things. But there's a whole other aspect to design, the dirty side of design, which is the administrative side.
Like,
Working on Excel.
Oh, okay. Designers are doing that?
Absolutely, it's a really sad thing.
I have never heard that.
So interesting story. At Love That Design, the way the whole idea for Dot Studio came about is that Love That Design positions itself as a design ecosystem. So we used to go to different design firms and talk to them about the projects that they've done and how do we photograph them, how do they put them on the platform, or we interview people and so on and so forth. And whenever we go and visit these people, because they were designers, we walk by their computers. So there's rows and rows and rows of computers, and you see their screens. And all these screens, what do you expect to see on the screen? You expect AutoCAD,
Yeah,
or you'd
AutoCAD.
expect some sort of SketchUp or
Yeah.
some sort of
Figma.
something
Yeah.
of that form. And invariably, all of it was Excel. In the construction space, you'll start seeing these people working in Excel.
Why is it not optimized? Like, they shouldn't be using Excel in 2024.
The construction industry itself, while we use a lot of design software, we don't optimize design and the administration side of things.
Okay.
So that's what we've done with Dot Studio, because we noticed that so many people were using Excel on their screens rather than AutoCAD or having a mood board or something of that form. We asked a question, and invariably what was happening was people were preparing for a submission or creating documentation of their design. So Dot Studio is a design documentation software. It helps organizations, especially in the hospitality space, document their design choices and put that onto a PDF document so that they can share it with contractors and other designers or other design professionals.
In this documentation, are you also interacting with the customer, like face to face?
So the design choices are documented for the customer's consumption. So
because you talked about hospitality profession included, so I feel like CX experience is required, right?
Yes, there's a lot of CX that happens as a study, and what happens in that space is that design firms interview the end users, and they create those experiences based off that. So there's a lot of understanding of what happened in that space. So we document a lot of those design decisions on our platform, and we have a retrieval system so that if you've designed one project, you can go back in and pull out that information again. So we try to make it an information retrieval system so that people can find out what their peers have done and then accordingly work on a project together.
Does a lot of data involved in this process?
Yeah, significant amounts. I mean, you think about like for example, a space like what we're sitting in. If you had to document every single piece of lighting, microphone, the table that's being used, the color of the leather and the finish on this leather, whether this chair is a certain kind of chair or not, it becomes extensive. Now, if you think about what we're doing is we're sitting in a very small space. What if you did this in a hotel? What if you did this in a city? There's a lot of design decisions that are taken that need to be documented.
Can I call it a data-driven design?
Yes, absolutely.
How would that come into the picture? I mean, I want to know more about it if you can share.
If you think about data-driven design, it's all about capturing the essence of what a user requires. And so that's one side of it. So there's a lot of surveys that happen where you're interviewing different people on different design
Yeah.
parameters, capturing that information and sharing it. The other side of data-driven design is actually, as a team, what are your design choices? So, for example, if a certain team is designing a space and they have a requirement for a certain kind of flooring, they look at their past choices or other teams in their organization to say, okay, this is what has been specified in the past. Another part of data driven design is that you look at the design in terms of the specification of a product. Say you're designing a space to have a certain sustainability function. So if you look at nowadays, if you go to buildings, you'll see that there's a sticker that says LEED certified, whether it's platinum or gold
Yeah.
or so on and so forth. And there are a certain number of points that that the building has to achieve during their test to see whether or not they are LEED certified or not. And so the products that are utilized in that space, they all come with these sheets of data. So designers need to have access to that information,
Right.
and then they can make choices which are sustainable choices that can be utilized for those products. So data-driven design for me really is about having the ability to access that information. So at Love That Design, for example, we capture all the information. We've got a database of 14,000 products,
Right.
and all those products have, and these are all construction products. They could be whatever you see around you in that space, whatever physical you can touch. And so we capture different data points
Right.
about what are the carbon emissions of that product, as well as what are the dimensions of that product. So depending on what you really need to utilize, you can search through the database and pick those products. So for me, that's also data-driven design.
Because we are talking about interior design,
Yes.
how is that different than landscape design?
Landscape design, there are some amazing organizations that do beautiful work. And especially if you think about biophilia and how important it's become in especially desertified environments like the UAE, it's really about being able to pick the right kind of product or the right kind of plant foliage that needs to be used in that space. How is it different? The design principles are pretty much the same. All projects go through the same thing. You have a concept, then you have a schematic, and the schematic turns into a detailed plan, and a detailed plan goes into execution. Many designers, what happens is you have to realize that you have to go through the process. So when you start design, for example, don't expect to be designing a project on your own from the very beginning. No matter what you've designed in the past, it's essential to uh, really ground yourself a little bit, work hard on understanding the basics, because many times people come out of the universities and they're like, okay, I'm ready. I was a rock star in the university and now I'm going to design this fabulous space because it's great. But I think what universities don't teach you is how to ring fence your design. They don't teach you about budgets, and they don't teach you about these kind of things as much
In
as they
interior
should.
design.
Yeah, in interior design, in architectural design, the concept of a budget sometimes is skipped out in most of the universities, and or maybe it's not skipped out, and the students don't really pay attention to it because
But they don't even know like what they could have been offered.
I think the importance of a budget, understanding a budget is such a big concept that any grassroots designer, when they come into the workplace, I think that's the first hit or the first thing that they're exposed to. Like, what? I have to design to this budget? How is this going to function? So I feel like it's important for them to understand that lesson first, that you have to design to a function, you have to be creative about it, but at the same time, your creativity is around a budget. And how do I stretch that budget as much as I can to still achieve the most optimal user experience for that space?
It's more about understanding the business than design, maybe.
It's about understanding the function rather than the design. It's about understanding the function before you design,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, that
You
makes
have
more
you have
sense.
to understand why am I designing this space? Who am I designing it for? And how do I make sure that this design is something that's going to last?
Yeah.
Because if you
But
think
there is
about
also phase of a product, right? It's after a certain point, you have to introduce something new or you have to upgrade or do something.
Have you ever seen an Eames chair? Have you heard about the Eames?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yes. So that design is classic. And so
Yeah.
when you think about product that moves from a standard design to some sort of iconic design, there are a few manufacturers that really have been able to do that with the products. And some of the designers, especially if you think about Charles and Ray Eames, or if you think about Corbusier in the architectural space, these people have transcended base level design, and whatever they do is creative, creating icons. And if you think about designers like Charles and Ray Eames, they did thousands and thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of designs. Not all of them were,
Yeah.
of course, things that
Yeah,
became
yeah, yeah.
classic and iconic,
Right.
but a lot of them did. And I think the reason for that was because they were persistent. They kept designing. It was in their DNA. Beautiful documentary. I think it's called The Artist and the Painter or something like that. Maybe something to look up. It really talks about this design journey, and I think it's really important as a designer to watch some of these things,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I feel like the education of design also has to become understanding the history of design. How did people do this in the past? And so you don't repeat those mistakes, or rather, you get inspired by
It's
those
like learning the case
mistakes.
studies that are already there.
Essential. It's essential for you to be able to look at the past and to be able to understand what makes good design, and that's why we capture that on our platform, on
In
Love
Love
That
That
Design.
Design.
Yeah, we showcase all sorts of projects that exist in this region. We talk about the designers and why they made those design choices, so that people can learn.
Yeah.
That was the whole reason we created this thing. We wanted to communicate that this Middle East region has got fantastic design. Here are the people who do it.
Learn
And
from
this
it.
is what it looks like. You learn from it.
Yeah.
Free to use resource.
Yes.
Anybody can use it. Because I think that it becomes important for the conversation to progress past by knowing what exactly exists in that space.
You know, I wanted to ask something which is not related to UX, but because I have an exposure, I never had an exposure to somebody who's in interior space. This is not related, but does Vastu come into the picture?
Of course. Of
Is
course.
it's something that I really don't completely believe in, but I just wanted to know the truth.
See, it's not about belief. I think what happens is when you think about a space and an experience, it's about the end user, right?
Yeah.
If someone is really Vastu oriented,
Yeah.
and they feel more comfortable in that space, automatically you design a
But
space in that
it doesn't
way.
matter if Vastu is true or not. It's because of the comfort of the user that's required.
I believe, so I'm biased. I like Vastu. I feel like it does enlighten a
I
space.
don't even know. Like, I wanted to know the truth. Is it real? Like, does it work if I keep it somewhere?
Try it. I think some of it is grounded in logic, if you ask me. We as human beings are susceptible to the powers of the light
Yeah.
and the sound and
Yes,
water
yes.
and so on and so forth. So if you think about the environment and creating an environment that you feel comfortable in, that you can be optimal in,
Yeah.
then Vastu has taken a lot of that logic and put it into that space.
Right.
There's no reason to not use it. You can learn from it. But I think it's important to understand why.
Why that is the case.
Why these things exist in this form? What is the logic behind these choices? I don't believe 100% in Vastu, but the principles are solid. A lot of it is solid, and I think that if you try to apply those to a space, invariably you come out with something better. But again, like I said, I'm a bit biased.
But it's included in the design, right? It's a very important thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's really important to understand who you're designing for, and if the end user is someone, design choices go beyond the logical choices as well. Sometimes it's about color and about what some people feel. Growing up as a guy, you think, okay, I'm never going to wear pink and white pants. Oh my god, this is something that is not done.
Yeah.
But as you grow older and you change your thinking,
Yeah.
it
You're
doesn't really matter.
conditioned to believe that it's not meant for you.
Exactly. And again, design choices have to be made for the user who's going to utilize the space, right? Even if you think about UX design, If you're designing a software that is going to be used for finance,
Yeah.
it's completely different from if you're going to design a software that's going to be used by interior designers. One wants to see reams of data, the other wants clarity and the ability to move things up and down. So if you're designing a software for an interior designer that's a mood board, for example, or something like Canva,
Right.
it's completely different versus if you're designing something that's a financial modeling software, because what you want there is the comfort to be able to put in numbers and do all of this kind of stuff. Each design is beautiful in its own space
Yes,
because the design has taken into consideration the end user. If you
Right.
don't take your end user into consideration, whether you believe in VASTU or you believe in faith or you believe in nothing at all,
Nothing
it
is gonna
doesn't
work.
really matter. Exactly. Because the space is not going to be used. And there's nothing sadder than creating a design that is not used.
Yeah. Then is no, what's the point? But then design in general has similar principles regardless of which category of design it is.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Even if you think about engineering, the engineering principles that go into designing something is same as if you're designing something in Figma
Yeah.
and you're creating a button.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because I feel like those design principles transcend.
Yeah.
They transcend disciplines.
So, like in person, when we are doing the interviews, even in our space, even for mobile and websites, sometimes we do that if they have the budget of the company. But I think in your space, it's just a required thing. It's not a luxury. For us, it's a luxury. If the company is allowing us to do it and setting it up, we do that. Most of the time, we skip it.
Yeah.
But I want to know about this in-person conversation and the research and survey from that side.
The budget is an important consideration, I believe, even for regular design. It really depends on whether a customer can afford to run through the whole project. And the cost of design really depends on how many hours you're going to put into that space. So it's so important to calculate that time and really understand what you can work or not work in that idea. If you don't have a clear understanding of what the customer can afford and you put in more time, then it doesn't work out in the end. At the end of the day, we all design as a business, and you have to be considerate about what time you're putting into something. Yeah.
But I would like to know about your journey overall. I know you've become an entrepreneur. You have gone through so many different phases. If you can just
I think I've
quickly,
never not been an entrepreneur, to be honest with you.
how is that? Like you've always been an entrepreneur from the beginning?
Yes, it's a very strange way of thinking, but so I've never been in an interview, a job interview.
Okay.
I've never created a CV
Okay.
or gone to an interview and done anything like
I think
that.
it's absolutely opposite for me. It has always been like that. I
Yeah.
created a CV and I applied for it. I got
No,
the
the
job.
only time I had a friend create a CV for me. She was very kind and she put something together for me, and it was because I was being considered for some voluntary board, and they said you need a CV, and I said I don't have one, and so she helped me because she was a recruiter. But beyond that, no, I've never had an interview. I've interviewed thousands of people for thousands.
You have interviewed.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
lots of jobs. So I've always been on the other side of the table asking these questions of people, trying to understand what their motivations are and so on and so forth.
No,
But
before Love That Design, then what was happening? Like,
before Love That Design, I was running a different organization. It was market research for construction. Prior to that, I was a contractor. So I was on construction sites and
oh, okay,
installing.
that's how you got all the knowledge and you started
Yes.
your own.
Yes, and prior to that, I was a computer engineer. We were doing networking. Networking turned into fiber optic cables and then into construction. I had a short stint as on a jet fuel pipeline. So yeah, I've done a lot of different things. But yeah, I've never really.
Had a mindset of becoming an employee.
I tried.
Okay.
It just wasn't my thing.
Okay.
I tried for 2 whole weeks. So it
In a
didn't work out.
company.
No. Entrepreneurship, people always think, oh, this is somebody who's going to start a company and, they're going to run. I don't think entrepreneurship is anything to do with starting a company. I think entrepreneurship is
A lot of
more,
risk involved.
it's responsibility, I feel. It's about knowing that when everything's going to fall, you are the one that is going to fall on. And when everything's lifted up, you're the one that's going to be lifted with it. Entrepreneurship is also mindset. I mean, it's about being able to say that, hey, no matter what happens, I will be able to survive this, and I'll be
Yeah.
able to keep moving on. So there's a different kind of positivity that goes along with it. And as an entrepreneur, what happens, at least for me, I find that the people that I work with, it makes the job so interesting. My co-founder in my business, I met him when I was, I don't know, 6, 7 years old. We've been friends since. And we only started working together 8 years ago, or 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 8 years ago now.
No, I feel like this is a luxury because I think I started a couple of ventures. Like every time I start something, another person is involved, and I would have some sort of dependency on that person. It never worked out for me. Now, this is something I'm doing by my own. There is nobody else involved, and I feel like I'm taking that whole accountability, whole responsibility. So now things are moving. But I feel like if you're lucky enough, yeah, you can have another person you can trust, and I don't know.
I think a lot of that has to do with all the interviews that I did.
Yeah.
So I interviewed a lot of people, and I understood who are the people I want
For
to
me,
work
I
with.
struggled like to find the person who's gonna be mature enough, committed enough, and gonna do the same way that the way I'm doing, rather than becoming like an employee
Exactly.
mindset. Like you will do what to do, then I'll no, I don't want to tell you what to do. You have to figure out yourself what to do.
Yes. And so for me, I have been lucky. Siddharth, who I work with, he and I we knew each other for 28 years before we started
That's a
the
lot.
organization. We call the organization 28 Light Bulbs, which is our holding company. Stephen, who I work with, who is our head of development, I met him when
In
I
Love That
was
Design.
in Love That Design. I met him when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
We went to university
And you know
together
them for
after that.
years.
I know them for years. And I think it's important to really understand that as an entrepreneur, because you're going to spend so much time with people,
Yeah.
you better like them. You
Yeah.
better really like them. And then make them a part of your family and work with them to develop something that you can both, or all of you, be proud of.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky because over the years, the people that I work with, they become like family. And I really enjoy that experience. And that's why it stops feeling like work,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you've
They
created
feel like
this.
family.
Absolutely right.
Is there any specific thing that you would like to say to the aspiring designers who are just like, who are restricted to the thought, restricted to this idea of what UX is all about? Do you have any advice for these designers?
Learn. Continue to learn every day and challenge the design that you make. Think about it from the user aspect and think about the benefit of the benefit that you're creating. Why are you creating what you're creating, and who are you creating it for? And once that purpose is served, is there any way to improve it further? That aside, so this is the logical side of design, right? Try to find the benefit of what you're creating for your end user. But as a designer,
Yeah.
I think it's also important to find your niche and to
It's
create your brand.
vast. Like they are so
Yeah.
restricted to that.
Don't try to find out what you are good at and develop that further. And it's really important to showcase what you do. Whether it's on Dribble or it's on
Behance.
Behance, and there are some other sites that are fantastic now.
Yeah, I've used Behance for my
There's
portfolio.
Mobbin, and there's another one that I was using that was really cool, Cosmos.
Cosmos.
So these are engines for inspiration, and if you start
Okay.
using some of these,
Is it restricted to interior? No.
I think design is inspired by all sorts of different things. So if you think about um, interior design is inspired by fashion,
Yeah.
which is inspired by art. So you can't look at design and say, okay, if I'm designing a button, I'm going to look at only pictures of buttons. Or if I'm designing a space, I'm only going to look at Pinterest and type in the space. No, you look at art.
Yeah.
You look at fashion. You look at all sorts of different disciplines. You look at nature and you say, okay, this is how nature designed it. And what lessons can I learn from that and plug that into my design?
People are not familiar with these.
For me, my most favorite books, and I have this little library that I have behind me. One is a book of the greatest print advertisements that were ever created. And every morning I make it a point to just open a page in that book. So this is like a picture book. It's
Okay.
almost like something that my son looks at. There's a lot of pictures of
It
of
doesn't
different
have
ads.
it doesn't have anything to read.
No, so there's very little text about which agency produced it and what was the campaign that they produced.
Okay, this is not
Um,
for knowledge, just
yeah,
for
this is
knowledge.
this is for me. It's just for inspiration. I
Oh,
open up a
okay.
page and I try to look at only one page in a day. It's like a little encyclopedia,
Yeah,
well, a big encyclopedia,
yeah.
and it's got all the ads that were created over time.
Mm.
And so I look at that for visual inspiration
Mm.
to try to understand how an idea can be communicated to
Mm.
an end user. I think it's
Right.
really powerful, and I'll share a copy of
Sure, I'll
that
just
book
include
so
that.
that you
Yeah.
guys can see it. And another book that I find that is really essential for me
Mm.
is the writings of an architect. His name is Corbusier. He was the architect that designed the infrastructure for Delhi.
Oh,
The cool thing about this guy is that while he drew a lot, he also spoke a lot and wrote a lot. And if you think about the emotion that is expressed in his design, for me that's invigorating.
mm.
I read it in the morning and I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to see how I can apply some of this into what I do. So
That's amazing.
so I will share those books with you so that you
Yeah,
can
I'm
have
just gonna
copies.
link it.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much of it. Thank you so much for coming, Ben. I
Is
really appreciate your time and the information you provided. It's invaluable. I don't think I would have gotten otherwise.
I hope this journey of yours continues, Shanika. I think
The
yeah.
fact that I get to talk to people like you, the fact that I have access, it means a lot
Good.
to
I'm
me.
glad. I hope your audience also appreciates it.
Yeah, they will.
Appreciates the work that you're putting into it, not so much the people that you have on the
Yeah,
screen. I think you've been really very hardworking. So great
yeah.
job.
I'm just trying that, UX is still very new. If you ask your mom's generation, they don't really know what it is.
No, no, they
So
don't. They
they,
don't. But yeah, that's changing. So
yeah. So I'm gonna try my best
yeah, keep
to
doing
make
it.
that happen. Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you so much.
No problem.